Tell me how you grew the organization from a talent standpoint.
That's a really open-ended question.
I know.
I think for me, I think the most important thing we did was we brought in people who were users. We brought in people who were in the community who were passionate about Puppet,
Yeah, I love it.
and we were way more interested in, are you gonna work really hard to help us succeed? Than do you have the credentials that say that this is a good idea?
Mhm.
Whether it was people who were ended up running our community organization, building it from
Mhm.
scratch, people who were sysadmins working for us. We had a lot of sysadmins in non-sysadmin roles because sysadmins knew the problems. They knew how to talk about
Right.
it. They knew how to train our customers. They knew how to, especially one of the things we did really, really well was we'd hire, and this doesn't sound like a thing, but we'd hire outgoing sysadmins and put them in
Mhm.
services roles
Mhm.
and say yeah, some of these stories are ridiculous. We had a guy who'd never been on a plane before. I mean, our first flight was we sent him to India, right? Um, and so we once they were unleashed with customers, they were really, really good at talking about what they got out of
Mhm.
Puppet. They had all been
Mhm.
Puppet users in the past.
Mhm.
They were really good at not selling it, but
Mhm.
telling a story in a way that you walked away convinced. Um,
Right.
that worked incredibly well. Frankly, a lot of the other parts were really, really hard. I got really lucky in hiring my head of sales. I hired the best salesperson in Oregon, and he stayed with us for 7 years or 6 years, and
Mhm.
he was the perfect player coach. Every venture-backed startup wants to hire a person who will carry a bag for the first 2 years and then
That's
build a
right.
team around them
And then,
after
of
that.
course, right, yeah.
Those people don't exist, except Scott Campbell was
Well,
that
a few
person.
of them exist.
Right,
There are some,
exactly.
yeah.
They're just so rare, right?
Yeah.
He was fantastic. And so between services people generating revenue and Scott
Mhm.
doing the selling, those hit really, really well.
Mhm.
Strangely, on the technology side, on the programmer side, I always struggled. I never had a programming leader. I never had a person running the product or engineering groups until the year I was fired that I had a good relationship with.
Why do you
Um,
think that is, Luke?
um,
I mean, the good relationship with, that's the important
yeah,
point
yeah,
you're
yeah.
making.
I think I think fundamentally, executive hiring is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Um, Frankly, I grew up on a hippie farm. I kind of feel like maybe executives shouldn't exist, and the whole idea behind them is essentially a form of wealth extraction that puts the frontline workers down at the expense
Mhm.
of we all know the wealth inequity that's going on right now.
Right. Of
We all
course.
know how the money accumulates at the top, and we
Mhm.
know who it's at the expense of, right?
Mhm.
And the executives have not gotten 1,000 times more productive in the
No.
last 50 years, right? If
No.
anything, I'd argue the professionalism of executives has dropped precipitously in the last 50 years, while their income has gone up precipitously.
Right. Right.
Um, so I think that we're frankly in an international crisis of executive quality right now.
Mhm.
But a lot of it too is like, when you hear me say that, you think that guy's probably not going to be very good at hiring executives, and you would be right. I struggled to find people that I could work well with. I think a lot of it is every founder, no matter what, you must compromise. And you'll read all these stories about like, oh, the one thing you can never do is compromise on your people. And those stories are poisonous lies. Because the truth of the matter is, zero people you hire are perfect. Zero of them.
Well, right.
Right. And you know that, and I know that, and everybody in the world knows that. So all the stories about how you never ever hire and compromise on people, those stories are pernicious lies, and all they do is make you doubt yourself.
I don't ever tell
So,
people that because I
right.
don't have
But I can
because of
find
the
you
business
50
I was
articles
in. Yeah, right.
right away that
Yeah.
would say that, right?
Right.
We all know that, A's hire A's and B's hire C's. Like, okay, well, who hired the B's then?
The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know, right? You just, you need
Right.
so
So the challenge, I think, for every founder is what are the right compromises to make?
that's right.
And for me in particular, I'm a weirdo. And what I know now that I didn't know then is a significant chunk of that weirdness is I'm autistic. And
Mhm.
I have a bunch of beliefs. I have a bunch of things that I want. And one of the questions was always like, do I bring in somebody? Do I look extra hard to find a person who agrees with those things, who I can work with on those things, or do I accept
Mhm.
that that person is going to run the organization differently than I would, but
Mhm.
they're good at their jobs and they'll do fine and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And in some areas, I was able to get exactly what I wanted. Accounting and finance is an example of somebody who
Mhm.
I had a really good relationship with somebody, and she was able to do the work the way they wanted her to do. And
Mhm.
when we had disagreement, she was willing to come in line with what I wanted.
Right.
I was just never able to find a product leader who had the right combination of, I've got enough talent, I can communicate effectively with Luke, and
Mhm.
I'm willing to do what Luke wants me to do instead of what I want to do. And the problem with me as a founder is like, you've gotta be on my boat, and I'm not gonna join on your boat, right? Like,
Right.
and so
That's very important what you just said, right?
yeah,
I, I wonder, did you, I mean, were you going out and looking on your own? I mean, how are you finding people?
for most executives, I hired a recruiter.
Okay, good. But the question is, given what I know of that business, which, I started in 1992, what, I mean, do you feel like you hired the wrong recruiter, that they weren't able to get to knowing what you needed, what would work, the kind of cultural fit with you? Those things are so important. And they're,
Um,
in a low barrier to entry industry, how do you find the top 2%? Those are the people that everybody should be working with.
yeah, I mean, again, because I'm autistic, I just the whole framing of top 2% I don't agree with, right? Like,
Mm,
it's and just like the whole idea of there being an A player, I don't agree with, right?
mm,
Somebody else's
mm,
A player is my failure, right? How many times have we
mhm.
seen a
Well,
domineering
that's right. It's an A player for you, not for someone else.
right? See a
That's
dominating
that's
athlete
right.
go somewhere else and just completely
Mhm.
fail.
That's
Like,
right.
did they suddenly become a crappy athlete? Of course not,
Right.
right?
There's no such thing as as an A player.
Right.
It's limited based on what your needs are.
And so I
That's
think
what makes it an A player for you.
right. And so I think for me, the biggest problem is that I didn't know enough
Mhm.
and I wasn't brave enough.
Yeah,
Um,
well, first time founder, that's not uncommon.
right.
So
And
I
the way
wanted
in
to
which I
talk
didn't
about
know
this.
enough is
Yeah.
I just didn't know enough about what was necessary to work with me.
Mhm. Right.
How what is the definition of a successful working relationship with me?
Mhm.
And and today I think I could express that pretty effectively.
Mhm.
Now I would still have a hit rate that was not 100%, but I think I could express that
No one has a
effectively.
100% hit rate.
Um, and then the I wasn't brave enough was essentially at some point you kind of say like, do I hire mainstream people who have demonstrated success um, and are de-risked in multiple ways, or
Mhm.
do I keep looking until I find somebody who is de-risked in that way, but also fits my like communication goals, etc.
Mhm.
And that could take 3 years, right?
Mhm.
And no, we all know we can't afford to do that.
Right.
Or do I hire somebody who is not canonically successful, but fits the other criteria of,
Mhm.
maybe they can get there and I can communicate well with them and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, and and I think far too often I picked the canonically successful person, who was honestly in every one of these cases, they were good at their jobs. My board loved almost all of them, right? A couple of
Mhm.
cases I just had straight misses, right? Like that happens. But
Mhm.
like I ground myself into a nub trying to get two of my executives to succeed. And they were my two most expensive, highest power, most visible, most famous
Mhm.
executives. And a board member took me aside and said, your ability to succeed as a CEO is going to be determined by your ability to get them to succeed. In other words, I'm going to fire you if these guys don't work out.
That's right.
Right. If you can't get them to work, then you're the wrong person to run this company.
Right.
And so I should have considered firing them early on when it was
Mhm.
obvious that I didn't have the right relationship with them, and I
Mhm.
was and I wasn't willing to, because
Yeah.
I didn't even consider it because it was so obvious that if I try to fire them, my board's going to go, well, someone's going to get fired, but um,
Mhm.
and sure enough, that's what happened soon thereafter,
Right.
and so that's just a case of like I hired people who should have worked out, and if they'd had a different boss, odds are they would have worked out. But because I was their boss and because of
Mm.
how I work, and frankly, because the organization that I had built that they walked into, right? Because it's not just organ rejection by me.
Mhm.
You're in an organization that I built that is a reflection of me. And
Mhm.
therefore, they were a struggle to fit into the organization too.
Mhm.
So, um, I don't know. That's a very long way of answering, but hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's something that if we had hours, we could talk more about, right?
Hmm.
You make a lot of points. It's determining what is the best fit for you out of a candidate is it's not an exact science. I know when I work with companies, I walk in with a list that I send in advance of 45 to 50 questions,
Hmm.
and it's in those questions where we start to learn. what do we need for the, XYZ role, whatever that might
Right.
be.
I had this really
And
great
still, it
experience.
might not be a perfect science, because we might learn after we've seen a couple of candidates, you know what, I think this might not work, and here's why, especially if
Yep.
it's a new position, right?
I had a really great experience that fundamentally changed how I thought about this
Mm-hmm.
with an architect.
Okay.
And it was the first time where I had somebody who fully inhabited their expertise, and there was no confusion about this person being in charge, or this person being good at their job, and this person
Mm-hmm.
owning the thing.
Mm-hmm.
But because architecture is essentially a service role, right? Like, you've got to please your customer, you've got to build something that your customer wants you to build.
Mm-hmm.
He also fully took on the idea of, like, my job is to build something that you love. My
Right.
job is to hear you, right? Is to really, really listen to you and to satisfy your needs. And it helped me see that my executives did not see that as their responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the major problems with executives is we tell them that they are amazing and they are special and they deserve $500,000, $1 million, $5 million a year,
Yeah.
and they shouldn't have to listen to other people. And the most powerful executives I had did not believe that their job was to make me happy. And that sounds egotistical, but what I really mean is, like, I'm the the force that aligns the metal filings in the business, right? I am the gravitational pull that everything else needs to line around, and that alignment creates success for the business.
That's right.
And when an executive says, "Well, actually, I'm really good. I don't need to align with you," right? I've got my own gravitational body, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's what was happening. And it
Mm-hmm.
took me too long to realize that I had too many and you need some of that, right? Your executives do need to have a bit of their own gravitational pull.
Right.
But I had people who were pushing too much of it. And when I would
Yeah.
say, I have an opinion about this, or I want you to tell me about what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing here, and I want to go through it, and they would say,
Right.
why are you micromanaging me? Why are you in my business?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, because your business is my business, right? Like,
Right.
and there's so much, I think, incredibly dysfunctional advice around this topic of micromanagement, around this topic of delegation, right? I mean, how many people, there's so many times where I see the advice of great managers get out of the way, great leaders
Mm-hmm.
get out of the way. I'm sorry, the definition of leadership is providing direction, right? You're going to
That's
tell me
right.
that you're going to get out of the way? Like, how do you delegate leadership? Like, it doesn't make any
Right.
sense.
Carol Schultz here. Thanks for watching this excerpt from Authentically Successful. The conversation doesn't end there. So if you want to hear this episode in full and all my conversations with many other successful founders and CEOs, please visit verticalelevation.com/podcast.